Okay. Happy Chanukah to one and all. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to do a little learning with you this evening in honor of Chanukah. And I want to just begin by taking a moment to thank our many sponsors for tonight's class, Deborah DeWinter and Phil Sussman, Rachel Lurie, Marilyn Rothschild, and Cindy Tropp and Stuart Elman. Thank you to one and all for your generous sponsorship. So what I'd like to do tonight is something that I've not done before on Hanukkah. I want to take you on a history journey. I want to learn with you about someone who I consider to be a fascinating and very important figure from the early modern period. And I want to use his life and legacy to make an argument toward the end about the clash between Hellenistic civilization and Jewish civilization, and maybe just reframe a little the way we think about what the Hanukkah victory means and what it means to quote unquote defeat Hellenism. So I want to set the stage by just providing a little bit of historic background for the moment in which we're going to find ourselves. The Chida is born in 1724 and dies, if I have it correctly, in 1804. We can check the dates. So we're functionally for the adult life of the Chida in the second half of the 18th century. So just to kind of refresh your memory, we're at the kind of end of the early modern period, and over the course of the lifetime of the Chida, we start to enter kind of a new period. In 1648, 1649, we have a cataclysm. We have the Chmielnicki massacres. 1665, 1666, we have another cataclysm with the false messiahship of Shabtai Tzvi. And for the next 100 or so years, the normative traditional community continues, and the fractures start to appear, and the world starts to change in very significant ways in the second half of the 18th century. Okay, so the Besht, Baal Shem Tov, is born in the end of the 17th century, and his students functionally bring Hasidism into the world in the second half of the 18th century. We have the beginnings, the stirrings of the Haskalah and the beginning of the Reform movement and the French Revolution and emancipation. So over the course of this man's lifetime, the Chida is born 1724, we just celebrated his 300th birthday last year. By the time he gets to the end of his life, right, the world has really changed. So that's the moment in which we find the Chida. And I just want to introduce him to you by talking a little bit about his profession, which is sometimes not talked about too much, but it's a very important contributing factor in the Jewish world in the early modern period. So the Chida is a shadar. Is anyone familiar with the term shadar? It's a Roshei Tevos. It's an acronym. Does anyone know what it stands for? So a shadar is shliach derachmana, or if you're in plural, the shluchei derachmana. So this is someone whose job it is to collect funds. And very specifically, it's someone whose job it is to collect funds for the Jews of Palestine. So why do the Jews of Palestine need funds? So we'll talk more about that in a minute. But basically for this entire period, the Jews of Palestine are destitute and in need of external support. So there's an Ashkenazic community in the Holy Land. There's a Sephardic community in the Holy Land. Whether and to what extent they're integrated or have too much to do with each other, we'll leave for another time. Let's just say for now they're not too integrated. and sometimes are even rivals. But the communities are small. They're living in the holy cities of the Holy Land, so they're in places like Hebron and Tiberias and Jerusalem. And the taxation is immense. The capacity for Jewish communities to sustain themselves through trade or other means is very, very limited. And there's always some crisis. There's a plague, there's a fire, there's an earthquake, and it's not easy to make ends meet in the Holy Land. And so a system develops whereby the community dispatches agents, these shadarim. The communities dispatch agents to the Ottoman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, the European continent, to travel around from community to community and collect funds and send them back to support the Jews of the Holy Land. So this is an important and very prevalent institution we don't have so many statistics, but between 1650 and 1750, there are around 1,200 shadarim. Okay, that's an enormous number. The biggest Jewish communities at this time are a few thousand. So the fact that you have this number of shadarim crisscrossing the Ottoman Empire and Europe at this time is a huge number. And as you can imagine, in the pre-modern time, the shadarim also play important roles in kind of both directions. So they're traveling and they're visiting and they're bringing news, or they're exchanging manuscripts or books from one community to the next. There was a sense that Kabbalah, which was in the air at this time, the real genuine article only came from the Holy Land. So sometimes shadarim functioned as emissaries of Kabbalah, and sometimes you find individuals who are turned on to mysticism because of a text that they learned about or a homily that they heard from a shadar, and that becomes issue in its own right. And the networks of these shadarim have a function in as much as they are connecting, and they become the connectors of various parts of the Jewish world. So the entirety of the Jewish map is connected by these agents. Okay, so that's the background to understand what it means to be a shadar in the 18th century. So let me just say maybe two quick or maybe three quick words about some of the challenges that came up for these shadarim, who tended to be rabbis and tended to be scholars. Right? So you want somebody to be successful, so you got to send somebody who's worthy, capable, trustworthy, known. And to the extent that somebody can speak the language and speak rabbinic, so that's going to make a stronger impression, and they'll be much more likely to have a successful mission. So I just want to share a handful of observations from that emerge from some firsthand sources. So I'm just going to pull up a couple of sources on your sheet, sharing my screen. And this comes, we haven't gotten to Chida, we haven't gotten to his travel diary, we'll come to it in a minute. But this is just an excerpt, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. And the Chida writes the following. It says, during my stay in Frankfurt am Main, I purchased many books, and likewise did my attendant purchase for himself. We deposited the boxes with said Reb Ruvain so that he would send them on to Amsterdam by river. He asked me to write to him from Amsterdam when I arrived, and he would then send them. And the Holy Congregation donated a considerable sum for my mission, but the scribe, Reb Israel, wrote in my Pinkas, which is my notebook, that it was for the Ashkenazim. Okay. The Chida is a Sephardic shadar. The money that he collects is now earmarked for the Ashkenazic community, and the Chida is not too happy about this. So he says, I pleaded with him till he erased it and wrote just for the poor, which meant that now he could disperse the money that he had collected to either Ashkenazim or Sephardim or both. There's this constant tension between the Sephardic community, which is collecting for the Sephardim, the Ashkenazic community, which is collecting for the Ashkenazim, and that becomes a trope. Another observation I want to make comes from a book called Megillat Sefer. My predecessor, Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter, is the world expert on Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and specifically on Rabbi Yaakov Emden's autobiography. Rabbi Yaakov Emden's autobiography is a book called Megillat Sefer, which he never published in his lifetime. It was published in 1896, 120 years after he died. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden just writes an anecdote about how he was once traveling from Prague. This is not a story about a Shadar, but I just want to share with you this excerpt translated by Rabbi Schachter because it's so telling about the perils of travel during this period. Okay, so here's the original, and I have it for you in translation, courtesy of Rabbi Schachter. He's on this. I'll just summarize it. He's on this coach. He's traveling from Prague, and he's sharing the coach, which he has to pay for, with some Christian businessmen who have all kinds of derisive things to say because Yaakov Emden is Jewish, and the day-to-day interactions are not too amicable. We had traveled only several steps from, I'm sorry, let me just pick it up from this paragraph. After they had been distressing us for the distance of around 10 parsecs from Prague, there came before us a very dangerous way, for we had to pass a very narrow path. On one side, a mountain straight as a wall, and on the other side, an incline as deep as the deep. Very precarious. When we arrived there, near to the very dangerous place, these wicked ones pushed us and chased us out of the carriage, as was their wont. So we did not object. We went on foot, and they were left sitting securely in their places. Okay, so they're not going very fast. The carriage is going very slowly, and Yaakov Emden and his attendant are traveling on foot behind the carriage. We had traveled only several steps from the carriage, and behold, the carriage turned over, falling on its front on the incline in the road as mentioned. It was carrying a heavy load of crates and boxes, and some fell on the aforementioned uncircumcised Italian businessman, almost breaking all his bones. He lay destroyed, very ill, and could no longer return to the carriage. He was forced to remain there on the way to seek lodging in a nearby village. There was a priest. Although the priest was not injured at all, the sick businessman did not want to let him go from his side, for he told him that he was obligated to grant him his last rites should he die. In addition to this, they became terribly distraught, for they knew that we rejoiced over their downfall. In this manner, these wicked ones who troubled us separated from us, and we departed from them in peace. Okay, so according to one estimate, 10% of all Shadarim lost their lives in transit. Okay? That's a stunning statistic. So the dangers of early modern travel can't be overstated. There's highwaymen, there's pirates, there's bandits, there's just the natural hazards of weather and roads that aren't great, and it's very precarious to travel on this mission. So if someone's going to undertake it, they also undertake it recognizing that it comes with risks. What was the argument that the Jews of the Levant made, the Jews of the Holy Land, right? The Gemara says, for instance, that when you have priorities in tzedakah, so who comes first? Aniyei ircha kodmin, the poor of your city come first. Now, the Jews of Palestine are also on the list. There's also a priority to giving to Jews who live in Israel. But I live in Prague. A guy comes knocking at my door and says, "I'm here collecting for the holy community of Hebron. Can you help me out?" So I have poor people in my neighborhood. Shouldn't they come first? What's the argument from, in my example, the argument from the community of Hebron? Okay, so I'll just introduce you to another text, which is a text called Sfat Emet, long before the famous Ger Rebbe by the same, wrote a book by the same title. There's a book called Sfat Emet by a Shadar named Moshe Chagiz, who was also from Palestine, and he had traveled through Italy and ended up for some time in Amsterdam, and he published a book called Sfat Emet in Amsterdam as a kind of guide for other Shadarim. I just want to give you the material that you could use if people ask you why they should contribute. And I'll share with you an excerpt from this quite fascinating book. Okay, so he writes the following. So he writes in the fourth line here, if anybody really wants to know the truth, this is the truth. Zos einat tzricha lifnim v'chi ha'am hayoshev ba hen od hayom b'chayim uv'mabes naso avon kari le'rachmana. He says, we're dwelling in this holy land, the eternal land of the Jewish people, and we're sitting between a life and death. Ve'aretz v'chol yoshvei hem hem hasovlim hatochachos v'yisurim. Bad shar achenu beis Yisrael nitzufim bagola. He says, we're on the front lines. We're living in the promised land, in the land of our forefathers, absorbing all of the suffering that we endure on behalf of the rest of the Jewish people. Someone has to be here. It can't be that there's Jews in the world and there's not Jews in Israel. So it's tough. Everybody knows it's tough because there's not enough food to go around, and there's epidemics and plagues and wars and all kinds of corruption and taxation, and we're taking the brunt of it. We could leave, but we're not leaving because we consider ourselves to be emissaries of the Jewish people. Okay, lefikach anu kol beis Yisrael kulo chayavim b'atzalas nefashos achenu ha'aniyim hadarim ba ki hem hanikraim kayom shomrei mishmeres mishkan Hashem. We're the keepers. We're the keepers of the covenant. We're on the front lines, and the entirety of the Jewish people should feel achrai. They should feel responsible for supporting us, because what we're doing is really a mission on behalf of the Jewish people. And it's amazing to read this text, which is actually written in 1707, and think about the argument that Israeli pioneers were making in the 30s and 40s and 50s, right, when it was not an easy time to make ends meet, and they were also struggling and suffering. And in many ways, the arguments are actually quite similar. Okay. So with this background in mind, I want to turn to our principal subject tonight and talk about the Chida. I said he was born in 1724. That's the right year. I said he died in 1804. That's the wrong. He died in 1806. So I stand correct. The Chida was born in Jerusalem. He was born into a prominent rabbinic family. We had important teachers, one of whom was the author of the Orach Chaim, Reb Chaim Ibn Attar, whose commentary you know from the Mikraos Gedolos. And the Chida's full name, why do we call them Chida? Chaim Yosef David Azulai. And there's a mythology around the last name Azulai. Anyone know the mythology around the name Azulai? So the mythology is that Azulai is the name of a family of Kohanim. And why do they have the name Azulai? It's a Roshei Tevos, it's an acronym. It stands for the words of the pasuk that describe the prohibitions, the people that a Kohen is not permitted to marry. Isha, Zona, V'chalala, Lo Yikach. So Aleph, Zayin, Vav, Lamed, Yud spells the word Azulai. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but that might be the origin of his last name. And the Chida is dispatched on behalf of the community of Hebron twice in the course of his lifetime. Two missions. And these are not short missions. Okay, each mission is 4 or 5 years. He's in 1753 to 1757. He's on a mission that takes him across Italy and German lands and Western Europe all the way to London. 1772 to 1778, he travels through Northern Africa, Tunisia, Italy, France, Holland, and at the end of his journeys, that second time around, after 1778, he actually never returns to Italy. He settles in Livorno, also known as Leghorn, and he dies in Livorno in 1806. I never figured out exactly why, but in 1960, 12 years after the established state of Israel, the body of the Chida was reinterred. It was moved from Livorno to Jerusalem. And now, if you ever visit Har HaMenuchos, right at the entrance of Har HaMenuchos is a monument and the grave of the Chida, Chaim Yosef David Azulai. Next time you visit someone on Har HaMenuchos, you can't miss it. You can pay your respects to the Chida, and now you'll know exactly who he is. Part of what's amazing about the Chida, and this is what draws me to him and what makes him so extraordinary, is the Chida was able to combine a whole slew of talents, and I would even say personalities. So I'll just put it up on the screen because it's so amazing just to see. In the introduction to one of his books, which was published posthumously in the 19th century, one of the publishers at the introduction said, "I just want to let you know some other books which are published by the Chida," and he counts them. Okay, so starting with number 1. This is a book published in Vilna in 1853. So you see the font; it's a little less clear than we're accustomed to. It's a little hard to read. He starts with number 1, and this is the list. I'm not going to go through it, but just so you have a sense, starts with number 1, that's to 19, 42, 49, 60, 71 books published by the Chida. Okay. Not all of them are 1,000 pages. Some of them are pamphlets rather than books. 71 books, extraordinary. They've all been published and republished. You can find a set now. It's called like something like Kol Kitvei HaChida, all the writings of Chida, 37 volumes or something. Just amazing. Now, lest you think that he was monolithic, just to give you a sense of the breadth of his work, he wrote exegesis, homiletics, casuistry, Kabbalah, commentaries to liturgy, literary history, and I just want to call your attention to 3 of his most well-known, or let's just say in this context, most important books. One of the books that he wrote is called Shem HaGedolim. Anyone ever heard of Shem HaGedolim? Shem HaGedolim is still used today by both students in the Beis Medrash and scholars. Shem HaGedolim is extraordinary. It's published in 1774. And it's a work in 2 parts. It's a kind of encyclopedia where you can look up the biographies of individuals, or you can look up titles of texts. Okay? And he will tell you whatever there is to be known about that individual or about that text. Part of what makes it so important is that, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, the Chida used his travels as a means by which to ascertain information that can contribute to these extraordinary works. Okay. So sometimes he'll meet someone. Sometimes he'll visit a library. He'll find an original manuscript. He'll see a different version of a book. He'll see a first printing of a book with marginalia written by the author. And he records everything. So there are books that are no longer extant. We don't have them, but we know about them because the Chida wrote about them, because he saw them. Now they're all gone, but he had them. There's a manuscript. We don't have it anymore, but he wrote notes. So at least we don't have the manuscript, but we have the Chida's notes. So it's the next best thing. Ad hayom hazeh, right? This is 250 years after he wrote this book. still serves as a super useful resource, again, both for people who are learning with the base medrash and for scholars of Jewish history. Another very important book that he wrote is called Birkei Yosef. Birkei Yosef is published in the standard text as a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch. So we know the commentaries that are more household names, the Shach and the Taz and the Magen Avraham. Right next to them, it's a couple generations later, is the commentary of the Birkei Yosef, very important commentary to the Shulchan Aruch. And the text that I want to share with you this evening is a book called Ma'agal Tov. And Ma'agal Tov is a travel diary, page by page. Today I was in Hamburg, and let me tell you what happened. And the next day I traveled from Hamburg, and let me tell you what happened on the way. And here's where I went next, and there's the person I met. And you have a first-hand account of every place, person, text that the Chida encountered over the course of these two extraordinary journeys. So Ma'agal Tov is an inexhaustible treasure trove for anyone interested in knowing anything about the cultural or intellectual history of this time. So I want to just share with you a few excerpts from Ma'agal Tov, and then we'll transition, if we can, into what I want to argue about the Chida and Chanukah. So I just picked, and again, there's 1,000. I'm not even exaggerating. There's 1,000 entries in this diary, and I just picked a couple that I hope will be interesting for you to see. So this first one comes from, let me just jump back. This first one comes from his first journey, which we said was in the 1750s. And here he tells you it's the 7th of Tevet. It's a Tuesday, and he's in France. And this is his entry. Tuesday, and I'm just sharing with you in translation for the sake of time. Translations, some are better, some are worse, but these texts exist. If you're interested in pursuing them, the Hebrew is actually quite hard because every other line is a paraphrase of a text from Tanakh or a citation from the Talmud. He's writing not just in rabbinic lingo, but like a very learned rabbinic lingo. So the footnotes in both Hebrew and English are sort of indispensable to know what he means when he quotes some obscure pasuk in Eov that is not on the tip of our tongues. It says, Tuesday in the evening I received a visit from the Marquis de Toumi, a man of learning and of great honor, and another honored Gentile, Vabati Italiano. They stayed some 2 hours, and I was answering all their questions. Finally, the Marquis asked me to bless him, and I blessed him, and also the other Gentile, and it was something amazing. Okay, I don't know who these people are. These are French nobles, and they're being blessed by the Chida. Fascinating. That day in the morning, Signor, whatever the S stands for, Fabrice, sent a fine carriage for us to go to Versailles. And we went together with Signor Ventura. He had sent a sword for this person. We just have his initials. We don't even know who it is. But I just put on my good clothes and we went to Versailles by this place where Signor Fabrice stopped at the house of a woman relative of his. They received us with cheerful countenances, gave us chocolate to drink. Then we went to the royal court. The Gentile went in first and I followed. So you see the level of detail. We know what he was drinking hot chocolate on the way to visiting Versailles. Okay, obviously he's not collecting money at Versailles. This is a side trip, because what happens when you're in Versailles? We entered a chamber, beautiful, splendid, many columns, gilded all around, supporting huge lamps. Many of you have been there. The ceiling was ornamented and decorated with pictures, and there high up was a gallery where courtiers were standing. We passed through many more rooms, regal rooms, and eventually we entered the council chamber. There at the top was a gilded, whatever that word is, dais, ornamented, decorated with regal opulence, where the king sits on his royal throne, with the ministers below him in the chamber. Then we went into Inner chambers. We stood at the beginning of one chamber, and after a while passed through some high-ranking ministers, and among them was the king's brother, Monsieur de Comte de Provence, who is called just by the title Monsieur. And the younger brother, Monsieur le Comte d'Artois, they stood next to me for about 5 minutes, and then the king went through. And what do you do when you see the king? I recited the bracha over a king, because there's a bracha when you see a king. He was wearing a simple red costume with the blue heraldin, a chevron with the royal arms. Shortly after the king had passed by, a minister came to Monsieur Fabry, who was at my side, saying, the king had asked of which country I was the ambassador. So the king of France, it's Louis, I forget which number, spots the Chida. They don't actually talk, but apparently it gets back to the Chida that the king was interested to know who's this, right? And again, people are wearing their home clothes. There's no, right, there's such little importation. We don't think about this, but you would be able to recognize a foreigner in a second by the clothes they're wearing. So this is a guy from Palestine. I don't know the last time the king of France saw somebody from Palestine wearing Palestinian clothes. So he sees him, says, where's that ambassador from? And he answered, no, he's not an ambassador, only a visitor from Egypt. Why he said he was from Egypt, not sure, who had come out of curiosity. After that, we left, and all those around were showing great deference. Some of the dams who were passing by made reverencia according to their customs. So the genuflecting at the Chida as he's leaving the palace of Versailles. This is not the travel diary of some, layperson or some courtier. This is a massive Talmid Chacham whose commentary adorns the side of the Shulchan Aruch, household name in every Beis Medrash, in every yeshiva in the world. The Chida visits Versailles. I'll just share one more excerpt to give you a sense of what's important to the Chida in his travels. Here's another excerpt, and he says, Tuesday we traveled by the coach that goes once each week from Frankfurt am Main to Worms, and we arrived on Wednesday near Mincha time. Okay. So he's actually traveling from Worms to Frankfurt, if memory serves. I went immediately to receive the countenance of the rabbi, the author of the Pnei Yoshua. Okay, Pnei Yoshua, Rav Yoshua Yaakov Falk, is the Gadol Hador. He's the greatest rabbi of his generation, maybe with the exception of the Vilna Gaon, the most important posek of the 18th century. Okay, maybe the Nod Behudas in the same category. The Pnei Yoshua, the greatest. Okay. First-hand encounter. Many people met the Pnei Yoshua, but how many of them wrote about it in their diary? The survey says 0. This is the only one. So what an extraordinary, valuable text to be able to have someone who has a first-hand encounter with the Pnei Yoshua and appreciates it as such. So he says, I got to Frankfurt, my first stop. Like, wow, the Gadol Hador lives here. I'm going to go visit. I went immediately to receive the countenance of the rabbi, the author of Pnei Yoshua, and his appearance is as the appearance of an angel of the Lord. Malach Hashem Tzvakos. I'm like blown away by meeting this sage. And he, in his kindness, gave me a welcoming countenance. I recounted to him all the events that had occurred about me, and I fell at his feet, let him pluck out my soul from bondage. In the course of the conversation, I told him that his brilliant book had appeared widespread in the land of desire, meaning, I don't know if the Pnei Yoshua knew this, but I'm saying he's bringing a report. Your text, which had actually, I think, just been published only in the past couple of years, your text, your Pnei Yoshua, is being learned back in my hometown of Hebron. Okay, and that all the scholars and rabbis of Jerusalem had benefited from the shining light of his Torah, the spirit of his understanding, and the beauty of his intellect. They love your book. They love your Sefer in the cities of Eretz Yisrael. And especially the outstanding rabbi, his honor, Rabbi Yitzchak Cohen Rappaport, may his memory live in the world to come, rejoiced in his heart that he had raised and that he had brought from his book, Bate Kahuna, in the last appendix, this great sage in Israel, was just thrilled that he was cited in the book of the Pnei Yehoshua. Okay? It's like he made it into the footnotes of a book by the Pnei Yehoshua. He's so excited. Okay? And now the Chida tells the Pnei Yehoshua this story. I told him that I, junior, in the synagogue at Hanau, had seen the second volume. And I had rejoiced over a whole treasure hoard, and when I had opened it and seen his holy sayings on the tractate of Megillah and followed his path, had been enabled to attend certain difficulty put by the rabbi, the author of Panim and Oros. He's so excited, and he goes on to say that the Pnei Yehoshua was so nice to him. He gave him a copy of his book, and he was so enamored by the experience of meeting the Pnei Yehoshua. Okay. Not everything goes so smoothly, and as you can imagine, there are ups and there are downs. And some people, he says, are very, very generous. Other people throw him out of town and don't help him out at all. And it's a mixed bag as far as his mission is concerned. Okay. I'll just share, if I can find it quickly, one other quick note that comes out of his travel diaries in Amsterdam. And I'll just say a word about Amsterdam, which is just amazing city for Jews. There's religious tolerance. Economically, things have been booming for decades. There's a very embedded and very prominent Sephardic community, the grandchildren and descendants of Marranos who used their business contacts back in the Iberian Peninsula to do very well economically, and they're very integrated. Okay, and some of them are a little too well integrated. So he says, in the city of Amsterdam, the Lord gave me grace and favor in the eyes of the heads and deputies of the Holy Congregation of the Sephardim. And he put in their hearts of those 2 channels of gold. They're very wealthy and very generous. And the Sephardim see a Sephardic Shadar and they donate generously. And then he says, may God repay their deed. May this be his will. They should be blessed for being so generous. I'm so thankful. And on the Sabbath evenings throughout the days of my stay in Amsterdam, I'd be invited to the houses of the nobles. But I didn't want to go on the Sabbath days on account of the foods which come through the fire. What does he mean? He's invited constantly. He's not worried about the kashrus. Why doesn't he want to eat in the house of the nobles of these wealthy Sephardic Parnasim in Amsterdam? What's he worried about? He's worried that they don't know Hilchos Shabbos.
Bishul or whatever.
Bishul, right? He's worried that they're cooking on Shabbos. It's complicated to know when you can put it on the blech, when you take it off the blech, and are you using a blech, and are you using it right? And so he's like a little uncomfortable, and you feel the tension. The people are so generous and they're supporting him. He wants to be respectful, and it's not so comfortable to eat in their house because they kind of don't know the Hilchos Shabbos as well as he would like them to. And again, 250 years later, all kinds of resonances, right? These are the challenges with parts of the community that might be very supportive and very generous and very integrated, but they're not so expert in Hilchos Shabbos. Like that wasn't their background. To be a little anachronistic, they didn't get to go to day school, right? Their grandparents were Marranos. So they had to escape and flee, and they didn't have the benefit of a yeshiva education. And so what do you do when you're invited to their house? That's a tricky path to navigate. Okay. So let me just pause there and ask if there are any questions or comments. And then in the time that we have left, I want to transition to say something about the Chida and Chanukah. Questions or comments about anything we covered so far?
I missed the very beginning. What is Shadar? What does that stand for?
Shadar stands for Shliach D'Rachmana. So this is someone who is on, I always think of the Blues Brothers. We're on a mission from God. So they were on a mission from God. they were holy emissaries. Their goal was to
Rahman.
collect money for the destitute Jews of
And
the Holy Land. Yeah. Yeah, Pearl?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the French Revolution. I thought it was 1789. I just checked.
1789, yeah.
So he was in the French court before
Yep.
that. So it was just like mind-boggling to think about that there was so much turmoil happening while he's doing all these travelings. And
yeah, no, just extraordinary to think about, the people that he's meeting and the places that he's traveling through. And as I say, from a scholarship perspective, he's so attuned, and we'll see this in a second, to texts and to manuscripts and to books and to libraries. And there might be, who knows what's going on, and he's not immune to any of it, right? There's a plague, and there's a conflict, and there's a war, and that, right? And that's all happening, betwixt and between his travels. Yeah, Michael.
So he sounds like a fascinating character, and in a way, he sounds like a mixed sort of different people rolled into one. So on the one hand, he's like a travel journalist. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, a Torah scholar. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, a messenger, carrying books and stuff like that.
Yeah. And
it's interesting that, there are like multiple purposes here. So I could see why these traveling salesmen, in a way, would be, play an important part in what's going on in the sense of linking communities and so forth. And I was thinking, some of the stories you mentioned remind me of some of the stories that were told about the Jewish peddlers in America. There's in the Civil War and post-Civil War period, you have the German Jews who were escaping from the revolution, this is later, 1848, so forth. And the peddlers came to America, and that's the way they earned their money was by, going around different communities and also doing double duty. They would spread information and so forth and so on. I can see why he was, considered worthy of being buried in the beginning of the cemetery. In essence, somebody realized this guy, deserves it.
Yeah, and there's no question. And this is, just a sort of 21st century observation. But I would just say, forgive me for superimposing it on the 18th century, but the personality types, you think of people that we know who would write an encyclopedia, they're journalers, they're chroniclers, they're recorders. So that personality type, the collectors, the aggregators, are not typically the creative, free-flowing, let's come up with the new idea. Right? There's like two totally different kinds of people. And yet the Chida is able to be both. A lot of his books are, encyclopedic, and a lot of his books are super generative and super creative. So you have these very different sides of the brain, however we want to think about it, cohering in one person, makes for a fascinating guy. So I just wanted to show you him in action. We looked at some of the sort of adventurous, fun, and again, it goes on and on. These texts are so rich. I'm just giving you, tip of the iceberg. But I wanted to show you a couple of his writings with respect to Chanukah from a halachic perspective. Okay. So again, I just sort of chose almost at random a few samples from his halachic writings, just to give us a little bit of a sense of who he was and how he was operating. Okay. So this is a text from his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch called the Birkei Yosef, and he writes, "Yesh mekomos shenagu she'ein Avle Aveim Omrim Kaddish B'Chanukah Upurim. And again, this is I think so fascinating and so important, because if not for the Chida, I'm not sure that we would know about this minhag. Maybe we have it somewhere else. I didn't check, but it's certainly not on our top 10 list. So what does he write? He says there are some places where our custom is, if somebody's in the first 11 months after Rahman al-Litzlan, a parent has passed away, they're saying Kaddish. Okay, so he says there are some places where those Avelim don't say Kaddish on Chanukah and Purim. Never heard of it. Didn't know that. Certainly, has never met anybody who said, "Oh yeah, I'm saying Kaddish, but today's Chanukah. I don't say Kaddish on Chanukah." But he's telling you that that's a real thing. V'ra'isi laharbe mirabbanei Italia hakadmonim b'tshuvos kisveyav shemekayimim haminhag. V'yesh mi shehei sheken hineg ha-rama. So what's so extraordinary is he's not just in an armchair in a library doing research. He's actually like on the road. So what does he tell you? He says there are places that have this minhag, but it's not just a concept like I heard about this. He says, I actually know it to be true because I have the manuscripts. A ksav yad means I have an original manuscript. Maybe it's been published, maybe it's not, that actually these manuscripts record that this is the practice among certain Italian rabbis. Okay? And some people even quote, I don't know who Reish Mem Ayin is, we could try to decipher who he's referring to, but that was his practice. He didn't say Kaddish for a parent on Chanukah and Purim. So I'm so excited about this kind of text because it integrates the life and the lived life of the Chida and the academic halachic life of the Chida, and they come together so beautifully, right? The travel and the experience and the exposure to people and the exposure to text actually informs the halachic commentary that now sits aside the Shulchan Aruch. And without getting into the details, in source number 8, this is just another example where he tells you about a particular halacha that he wasn't sure. He went back and forth, and he says, "V'achar zman rav zikeni Hashem ubar liyadei shiltos ksav yad al klaf yashan." I was trying to figure out this halacha from a book called the Shiltos, and then, thanks to the grace of God, I ended up finding an original manuscript. And I looked in the manuscript, and I actually saw that the publisher made a mistake because I had the original, or like an earlier version, right? So he's doing, we would call this like 21st century research, right? The sense of like comparing the manuscript to the book, and it's so modern. And he's doing this in the 18th century, using manuscript research to inform the halachic discussion. Okay. Let me just share with you a comment in source number 10.
And Rabbi, you know how hard it is to read in a moving vehicle like a carriage.
No joke, by the way. Very hard to read in a moving vehicle, and just you think about how pleasant it is to sit in a library at a desk, and you have all the light, and you have easy to read. He's sitting there with the candle and a piece of parchment, and the landlord is telling him that he has to get out because there's a new tenant coming, and he's got to make sure that his attendant has the plan to get from Worms to Frankfurt the next morning. You talk about harried, and for years, it wasn't like, oh, he took a trip for 2 weeks. In fact, 8 years of his life, he's on the road, traveling to and from various communities, and this is the fruits. These are the fruits of his labor. Okay. I'll just share with you source number 10, and I'll just sort of summarize it and then bring it up in a second. Comes up every year because Chanukah is 8 days. In our Tuesday night class, we talked about this. There's always Friday afternoon, which is Chanukah. So it brings up the question: you have to light Chanukah candles, you have to light Shabbos candles. Which candles do you light first? And everybody knows. Ask any school child. We know that you should light Chanukah candles first, because after you light Shabbos candles, it's Shabbos, and then you wouldn't be able to light Chanukah candles. That's exactly what the Shulchan Aruch says. Okay. That being said, until the 16th century, it was a kind of unsettled matter. And if you opened up the Tur Shulchan Aruch, the Tur which preceded the Shulchan Aruch, the Tur writes both positions. He says there's a good argument to say that you should light Chanukah candles first, and there's also a pretty good position that says you should light Shabbos candles first. Why should you light Shabbos candles first? Who said after you light Shabbos candles that it's Shabbos? Think of what we do on Erev Yom Kippur. A lot of us do this because shul's so early. So we light candles, and we just have in mind, I'm not accepting Yontiv until 20 minutes later, until I get to shul. So that's perfectly fine. You could do that any Shabbos or any Erev Shabbos or any Erev Yontiv. If you light candles, you say the bracha, and just have in mind, I'm not accepting Shabbos in this moment. I'm just going to accept Shabbos in a few. You could do that on Erev Chanukah, light that, right? Perfectly valid.
Is it a Tadir V'Sheino Tadir issue?
Yeah. So that doesn't get mentioned in the Tur, but that's exactly what I wanted to bring up in the comments of the Chida in his commentary called the Birkei Yosie. So first of all, just notice, by the way, Pri Chadash Kasav Dilarova Poskim Dekla Shabbos Lo Talia Bad Laka Eisem Shir Tzayaktim. So the Pri Chadash is a fascinating figure, and maybe we'll spend some time learning about him. Chizkiah de Silva, who lives only for a short time. He's a controversial Sephardic posek living in Amsterdam at the end of the 17th century. And the fact that the Chida leads with him is itself fascinating. But there's a small cadre of these prominent Sephardic Gedolim in the 17th and 18th centuries. So the Chida attaches his wagon to the Pri Chadash. He leads with the comment of the Pri Chadash, who says basically what I just summarized, which is, according to most poskim, you could light Shabbos candles, not accept Shabbos, and you're good to go. So whatever you want. If you ask the Pri Chadash, what should you do Friday afternoon? Shabbos candles, Chanukah candles? Well, whatever you want. Dealer's choice. Doesn't matter. He says, Adarab, and actually, Ner Shabbos Kodem to Tadir Kodem. So exactly as Bernie just said. In fact, there's actually a strong argument he made that maybe the Shabbos candles should take precedence, because we have a general rule, Tadir B'Sheinu Tadir Kodem, given the obligation to perform two mitzvos. We don't apply this principle when we're choosing between two. But if you're going to do both and you want to know which one comes first, pick the one that's more frequent, which is sometimes a little counterintuitive to our 21st century sensibilities. Like, the more special. No, the more common, the more frequent actually comes first. Shabbos 52 times a year, Chanukah 8 times a year. Shabbos should come first. Now he says, "V'od yesh tam lahakdim ner Shabbos, zehu mekudash mi ner Chanukah, v'chol ha-mekudash mi chaveru kodem es chaveru." He introduces a new element to the conversation. He says, at the end of the day, what's like the holier thing, Shabbos or Chanukah? I mean, Shabbos is it's Shabbos. Can't get holier than Shabbos. Obviously, that's holier than Chanukah. Maybe that should be a second reason. Okay. And then he adds a third reason. He says, "Va'odi ketam ki'ikar al derech emes de ner Chanukah bereisha ve'achrach ner Shabbos de malin b'kodesh." So this is not a third reason, a counter argument, which also is not in the Shulchan Aruch. He says, we have this principle of malin b'kedusha, that we start with the lower and we go up. So actually, the sense that Shabbos is more kadosh militates in favor of lighting Chanukah candles first, because when it comes to Kedusha, start with the less Kadosh and move your way up. So at the end of the day, he sort of concurs and says that really the best practice is to light Hanukkah candles as we do, and then Shabbos candles. Just for interest's sake, and we're going to wrap up in a minute or 5. I want to introduce you to another text. Okay, there's so many. There's 71. We've only seen 2 or 3. The Chida is also a posek. So a posek is not just writing a code or a commentary to a code. Hypothetically, in the following circumstance, what you would do is, but he's also in the world of living halacha. Somebody writes a letter, somebody knocks on the door and says, Rabbi, I have a question. My spoon fell into the soup. Okay. So you don't need a code, you need a posek to answer that question. What do you do in this lived circumstance? And maybe there's something extenuating, maybe there's something that's not in the code, maybe something is a little different than our normal halacha. So he has the following book. He has a number of books of Shailos and Shuvos. One of them is called Yosef Ometz. And here's the question. You ready? He says, She'ela Zahaya Maaseh. Happened. This is the story. V'achad she'amar al hanisim bi'avoda b'Chanukah. Hear what he did? You could see this happening. You know, when we have Rosh Chodesh or Chol HaMoed, so you're saying a regular weekday Shemona Esrei, and you have an addition in the bracha of Ritzei. You add Yalav Yavo. On Chanukah, we're saying a weekday Shemona Esrei, and we add Al Hanisim, but only in Modim. So what did this guy do? He's so used to the addition being in Ritzei, he added Al Hanisim in Ritzei. So if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, you're supposed to say Al Hanisim, and there's a halacha, what happens if you skip Al Hanisim? If you open up a Shulchan Aruch, you will not find what happens if you didn't skip it, you just said it in the wrong spot. What do you do? So, interesting. And he's not making it up. Maybe if you were writing a code, maybe you wouldn't think this would, but it happened. So now we have to deal with it. Okay. Ve'agav tirda hishlim tfilaso. And he didn't pick it up, and he continued. And he didn't notice, V'achar kach mekomo muskar lo shehu b'hoda v'lishol higia da'agam einu chozer aftelo amar alanisim klal mikomakom ha de amro shelo b'mkomo ba'avoda ichashiv hefsek ubar mahadar. Odilma b'di'evet alsalo v'einu tzarach lachzor yorenu hamora. Here's the question, right? Do we say, really, he said into the wrong spot? It's actually a hefsek. You're not supposed to include things that are not meant to go where they, in the wrong spot, and then maybe you have to go back and say the whole Shemona Esrei again. Or b'di'evet, post facto, he said the wrong spot, but he still said it. There's an argument this way, there's an argument that way. What should he do? You understand the question, and we could go through it if we had the next hour and a half. But 16 paragraphs to get to the bottom of whether or not this person needs to repeat Shemona Esrei. Okay. We're almost out of time, so I'll just share, because I found it so fascinating. How does the Chida observe Chanukah? What does his diary say? What was he doing on Chanukah? So what's interesting is he kind of just went about his business. You have to remember, he wasn't plying a trade. He's on a divine mission to collect money, so he's doing mitzvos. His day job is to do mitzvos. But this is the only date I could find in the diary. It's Chaftes Kislev. It's snack in the middle of Chanukah. And he says, this is what happened. He's back in France, have very precious too, where the kindnesses of the people of Avignon and the Holy Congregation of Cavaillon, where wherever in any distant place, even one of them is to be found, I was sure to receive great honor and success. They're so nice to me. Behold, these are the 7 townships of France that I encountered, and they were as beacons of light. Okay, the district settled by the 4 congregations, and he goes on to name them. I suspect that was intentional. Right? He's writing about his travels on Chanukah, and he describes them in glowing terms by calling them beacons of light. Again, I don't think that's accidental. I think that actually is right. V'hayu le'me'orot, I think that actually is because he's tipping his hand to the fact that it is Chanukah. Final genre that with this we'll wrap up with a final thought. He has this book called Mora Be'etzba, which is it's anachronistic to call it a Musar book, but it's like we tell you how you should behave kind of book. I'm not getting into the details of what happens if you said Al Anisim in the wrong spot and when to light Shabbat. It's candles or Hanukkah candles, which comes first, just the basics. You could almost see this like a student handbook. So he says, what should you do? Bimei Chanukah Yizar Ma'odim. So it's very hard to read. This is a single printing. Until the 21st century, it wasn't reprinted. He says, Bimei Chanukah Yizar Ma'od Ba'adlaka Bismana Hu Ba'atzmo Ba'al Yismoch Al Yeled U Mishares De Mitzvah Bo. He says everyone should light their own Chanukah candle. Don't rely on a child. Don't rely on a shaliach. Everyone should light their own Chanukah candle. And he says you should get the best kind of candles, and everyone should have in mind it should be the kol l'shem shamayim. And then he says ma'od yizdaras shelo yishkach al anisim b'tzvila u'b'birkas hamazon. And I suspect that this is related, right? I don't know which came first. I didn't check the dates, but he says be very careful to remember al hanisim in your tefillah. And part of I think what he means is remember to say it in the right place, because sometimes people are not thinking about it, and they say it in the wrong place. I'll just conclude with his final paragraph. He says, and I had a half minute to do a whole share on this, but he says, I just want to remind you that these are holy days, okay? And don't like besmirch these days with schok v'kalos rosh ki bimei nisim shechayvim lahodos lishmo yisbarach b'makom hoda eich yachtav asham l'mi sheyesh lo lev yaspik zeh. We have, based on the record books of various communities, there was a lot of rabbinic opposition because there was a very old tradition to play cards and to gamble on Chanukah. And there's an implicit critique here by the Chida. He says, these are holy days. These are days of Hallel and Hoda'ah, and they're miraculous days. And don't fritter away the time with nonsense by playing cards or whatever else he has in mind. Concentrate on what matters. Keep your eye on the prize, and remember to celebrate Hanukkah as it should appropriately be celebrated. And with that, I'll conclude with one final thought, and that is this. I think a lot of us, myself included, carry with us from our grade school education that Hanukkah is the clash between the Jews and the Hellenists, and there were those who wanted to keep tradition, and there are those who wanted to Hellenize and acculturate and become much more like the Greeks and forget Judaism and accept the Greek way of life. And there's a lot to that, and that is an appropriate way to teach the Hanukkah story, especially in grade school. But I would just add a kind of caveat, which is, of course, we recognize and appreciate that it's not really binary. No one says, we should put our heads in the sand, and the notion of astronomy or mathematics, because it comes from a foreign culture, like we can't touch. That's not our MO. That's not how we function. That's not how we operate. What we really do is we try to adapt and adopt the very best of whatever that Greek culture might be, in a way that allows us to maintain the supremacy and the primacy of Torah and mitzvos and Yiras Shamayim, to use the great things that come out of Greek culture and everything like Greek culture in the service of Torah and mitzvos and avodas Hashem. And it just struck me that the Chida is such an extraordinary example of someone who's able to accomplish just that. His whole life is devoted to mitzvos, right? His whole mission, literal mission, is to try to raise money and support and make whole those destitute Jews in the Holy Land are fighting the good fight, but can't make ends meet. And he's just going, it's not easy to make those asks, and he's doing it and making the case to support those in need. And along the way, he stops in Versailles and he has a hot chocolate and he meets the Pnei Yehoshua and he writes an encyclopedia. And everything that happens is all channeled into the service of Hashem. 71 books, encyclopedias and commentaries and shilos and shuvos and commentaries to halacha and the commentaries to the Siddur and on and on and on. And what he accomplishes is remarkable. But forgetting the quantity, just the mechanism, just the orientation, to be able to see the world through this lens that says, here's an experience, here's a place, here's a person, here's a book. How can I approach it? And how can I incorporate that experience into my avodas Hashem, into my service of the Creator? And I think it's actually quite a resonant message when it comes to how we think about Chanukah. It's not binary, right? It's not this is the Hellenists and this is the Jews and never the twain shall. No, we survived, and there's miracles, and we're still here, and there's more miracles. And if there's something that can be used in the service of Hashem and the service of our commitment to the Jewish people, then how great is that? And just look at the Chida, how great was he? So we're over time. I apologize. We're going to stop here. I'm happy to stay on and take questions or comments, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite figures from the 18th century. And thank you for learning about the Chida to help celebrate Chanukah. I wish everyone a Freilich Chanukah.
Happy Hanukkah. Thank